Hi, everyone. I think we're gonna get started. Welcome and thank you to the colleagues joining us today from various missions, UNICEF and other UN agencies, as well as civil society, both here in the room and online. My name is Ashley Lovett. I'm Islamic Relief USA's UN representative in New York. It's wonderful to be here with you today and to have had this opportunity to collaborate so closely with colleagues from ChildFund Alliance, Malala Fund, Plan International, and the Women's Refugee Commission on such an important event. This side event, building resilience and strengthening access to education for girls in crisis settings. With this event, we aim to bring together representatives from government, civil society, and practitioners to raise awareness about the ongoing challenges faced by girls, but also the strategies and innovations emerging from efforts to improve and protect access to education for girls in crisis-affected contexts. Islamic Relief USA is deeply committed to supporting women and girls, especially in crisis settings, where their education is often the first thing disrupted and the last thing restored. For Islamic Relief USA, keeping girls learning in these contexts is central to our mission. It's about saving lives, restoring dignity, and building stronger communities. Education in conflict-affected and fragile societies isn't just about school. It's about safety, stability, and hope for the future. By supporting girls' education, we also help lay the foundation for women's economic empowerment, giving them the skills and opportunities to support themselves and their communities. That's why we invest in programs that help girls stay in school, stay protected, and gain the skills they need to help their communities recover and thrive. We're fortunate to have a strong lineup of speakers this morning, and we'll kick off with opening remarks followed by high-level interventions and a robust civil society panel discussion. For opening remarks, I'm pleased to introduce Meg Garnier, the Secretary General for ChildFund Alliance, a global network of 11 child-focused development and humanitarian organizations. Meg has more than 25 years of experience and has held leadership positions in a range of child rights organizations, including Elevate Children Funders Group, a director of Arigato International New York, managing director of the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, and executive director for the International Catholic Child Bureau of North America. She's a founding member of Campaign for U.S. Ratification of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and serves on the leadership board of the Joining Forces. Thank you for being with us today, Meg. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I don't have to introduce myself now because Ashley did that, but I did want to say how happy we are to be here. As we know, the title is Building Resilience and Strengthening Access to Education for Girls in Crisis Settings. And as Ashley explained, the session has been organized by Islamic Relief, Malala Fund, Planned International, the Women's Refugee Commission, and ChildFund Alliance. And I want to express our collective thanks and appreciation to the Baha'i international community for once again graciously providing us with this beautiful space for our session today. These spaces are not easy to come by during UNGA week, and I know we all worked hard to find a place, and Baha'i was very open. So we have a limited amount of time, and we'll honor that as well. As I can imagine, this space is in demand. As Ashley explained, I serve as the Secretary General of ChildFund Alliance, one of today's organizers. And as she mentioned, we're a global network of 11 child-focused development and humanitarian organizations, helping 36 million children and their families in 66 countries. Collectively, the Alliance works to end violence against children, provide expertise in emergencies and disasters, and engage in partnership with children, families, and their communities. As we are painfully aware, children today are growing up in a world marked by profound disruption and accelerating change. The intersection of climate change, increasing conflict, humanitarian crises, escalating inequalities, and reversal of human rights and humanitarian norms, all set against a backdrop of increasing geopolitical tension and diminishing multilateralism. All this has created a perfect storm where children are most affected. According to UNICEF, and we'll hear more from them later, 1.2 billion children, almost double the number in 2019, now live in countries with complex emergencies driven by inequality and fragility. Earlier this week, ChildFund Alliance launched our new strategic plan for 2026 to 2030. It's called Championing Child Rights in a Changing World. Our second strategic priority is child-sensitive humanitarian action. And within this context, we're acutely aware that the rights of girls and gender equality are at severe risk. According to Education Cannot Wait, and we'll have these figures in our concept note, a staggering 234 million school-age children in crisis-affected countries are estimated to need urgent support to access quality education. And of the more than 85 million children already out of school, 52% of them are girls. 14.5 million of those out of school have been forcibly displaced. As former First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama once said, when women are educated, their countries become stronger and more prosperous. And this brings us to the focus of today's program, where we aim to be as solution-oriented as possible. Panelists will discuss the importance of gender-responsive education in crisis settings that can reach the most vulnerable girls. We'll talk about identifying solutions, locally led responses, highlighting the role of local partners, and then also identifying strategies for policy influence. And to that point, and this is my final remark, ChildFund is a member of Joining Forces for Children, which are composed of 6 child-focused agencies committed to ending violence against children. In March, Joining Forces issued a policy paper, Close the Gap, Invest in Ending Violence Against Children. And one of our key priorities with donor governments at Joining Forces is to make the case that child protection is a life-saving investment. Today, aware that education is a key component of child protection, we will examine the life-saving role of education in the lives of girls and advocate for this vigorously in this challenging environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. I'm now pleased to welcome Ms. Stella Roner-Grubacic, Deputy Managing Director for Multilateral Relations, Human Rights and Democracy at the European External Action Service, EEAS. Ms. Roner-Grubacic was appointed to her role at the EEAS in November 2023. She's in charge of EU relations with multilateral organizations, including the UN and Council of Europe, focusing on human rights and democratic processes through elections. Before joining EEAS as Ambassador for Gender and Diversity in July 2021, she worked for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much, and for pronouncing my name right, which I know is a bit of a struggle. So very happy to be here. Grateful for your invitation, because it really does give me an opportunity to share with you the importance that we from the EU attach to education for girls. I want to start by stating the obvious, and I feel a little bit humbled with so much of expertise around the table. But I mean, the obvious, of course, is to say that every child everywhere has the right to education, and that right to education does not apply only to girls, but very much also to boys. We need to make sure that boys learn early on that there is no reason for them to believe that the right to education does not apply equally to girls. I'm saying this indeed also with my former hat of Ambassador for Gender and Diversity, where I've been speaking about this topic so often, stressing precisely this point. If we don't teach boys from an early age that this right to education applies equally to all, they get off to a wrong start. And we, I think, all of us lay the foundation for the inequality in our societies that still continues to reign today. That being said, and precisely because of the persistent discrimination and inequalities that girls and women are confronted with in today's society, we need to support girls even more than boys. We need to empower girls, and we need to do that especially in the context of crisis, displacement, and humanitarian emergencies. We know that when it comes to such crisis situations, girls are disproportionately affected by the impact of conflicts, displacement, migration, climate change, you all mentioned it, and or emergencies induced by natural hazards. I don't want to throw more figures at you, but still, we also know that children account for 30% of the global population, and at the same time, on average, 40% of refugee populations and 49% of internally displaced children, people are children. And we know even more, namely that globally, over 50% of girls not accessing education find themselves precisely in crisis-affected situations in countries. And projections even show that by 2030, 1 in 5 girls in crisis-affected countries would not be able to read a simple sentence if we don't do something now. I want to give you just very quickly a few examples of what the EU is doing to respond to the impact of crisis and conflict on girls and young women. We are very much committed to ensuring that girls are placed at the center of our humanitarian policies, operations, and advocacy, as well as development projects. I should add that, again, this includes boys as well, because girls' empowerment also requires working with boys, in particular addressing these gender stereotypes. The EU Commissioner for Preparedness and Crisis Management, who's also here in New York these days, Raja Labib, pledged recently to maintain a 10% budgetary commitment to education in emergencies. This makes the EU a reference donor and a leading voice when it comes to the importance of investment in education to empower girls and boys in humanitarian settings. In 2023, the EU and its member states pledged to invest an additional 313 million euros in Education Cannot Wait, the UN Global Fund that supports girls and boys' equal access to education and learning in 31 crisis-affected countries. And in 2024, we dedicated an estimated 160 million to child protection activities, which constitutes nearly 49% of the total EU's humanitarian aid protection budget. With all of this, I don't want to say that in order for girls and young women to become leaders, we need to address their vulnerability. Through the EU's work in the field, we witness time and again the remarkable resilience and strength of girls and women. Even when they have been trafficked, victims of gender-based violence, sex slaves, or other unacceptable violations of their rights, they still express their hopes for a better, more peaceful future. And that future, I'm truly convinced, begins with education, enabling them to build a life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now pleased to welcome Mr. Ted Chivin, appointed by the UN Secretary General in May 2023 as Assistant Secretary General to serve as the Deputy Executive Director, Humanitarian Action and Supply Operations for UNICEF. Previously, Mr. Chivin was the Global Lead Coordinator for the COVID-19 Vaccines Delivery Partnership. He's also served as UNICEF's Regional Director for Middle East and North Africa, Director of Programs, Director of Emergency Programs, and other senior leadership roles. Prior to joining UNICEF, Mr. Chivin also served as Country Representative for Catholic Relief Services in Haiti, Kenya, Uganda, and Sudan. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Chivin.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And I really want to express my appreciation to the partners and the panelists who are with us here today. This is such an important discussion for us to come around on. Today, more than 234 million children are directly affected by crisis, and they need educational support, with girls representing disproportionately those that are affected by the lack of support. In conflict and fragile settings, girls are often the first to be pulled out of school and the last to return to school. In places like Sudan, Afghanistan, Haiti, and Gaza, millions of girls are out of school, facing risks of violence, exploitation, and early marriage. And in addition to that, this year alone, the UN verified 1,265 attacks on schools, a 44% surge from 2023. Those are 2024 figures. So the denial of education is not just a violation of rights, it's a denial of hope, protection, and the chance to rebuild societies. I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but just to remind everyone that education is not just a life-saving intervention in emergencies, and I really want to appreciate the role that the EU has played in making sure that that continues to be the case, and that we have insisted is the case even in the humanitarian reset that we're all part of. It's not only life-saving, but it's also life-sustaining and life-changing, because it provides structure, safety, and hope for children and their families amidst the chaos. If you look at the one intervention that makes the biggest difference in terms of achieving any development objective, including all of the SDGs, it's girls' education. It's the one that has the biggest multiplier effect on maternal and child mortality, increasing lifetime earnings, and building more peaceful and resilient societies. And then, as you know, against that positive part of the ledger sheet, girls in crisis settings face unique barriers: targeted attacks on schools, gender-based violence, forced displacement, and harmful traditional norms. But despite these challenges, girls and their families show extraordinary resilience. And one of the beauties of my job is I get to travel to many places around the world and see both the work that UNICEF does, but also speak to girls and hear from them directly. And let me focus on two contexts. Firstly, I want to turn to Afghanistan, where by the end of 2025, the ban on girls' secondary and higher education will have excluded 2.2 million adolescent girls from formal education. And that number, of course, continues to grow each year. If, according to our data, this ban persists until the end of the SDGs, 4 million girls will have been unable to continue their education. I traveled to Afghanistan last month. I went to Herat on the border with Iran. I went to Kunduz and the center of the country. And everywhere I went, girls came to me and said, how can we continue our education? I want to be a teacher. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. And they're determined. They're determined to do it. So we need to be there with them. And I can tell you that we've had some movements, modest such as they are, and with the de facto authorities, but we need to continue to persevere. In March, I was in Haiti, where girls who have survived violence and displacement still dream of becoming teachers, leaders. In one school in the Delma area of Port-au-Prince, I met with a 14-year-old teenage girl who had been sexually assaulted by the gangs and shot in the face. She still had the scar across her mouth. And despite the trauma that she had been relocated further up in the heights of Port-au-Prince where it's safer. And she told me that the one thing that gives her hope is that she continues to attend school, despite everything that has happened to her. And she told me that amidst the chaos of overcrowding and everything that's going on in her country, she still wants to become a doctor. She's still going to become a doctor. And school is what is her guiding light to that pathway. So I think we need to match the resilience and strength of these girls. And each of us, and again, I know we're a community that believes in this, but continue to fight every day so that we can continue to make a difference. And this is despite the fact that in addition to everything else, we're all facing resource and funding cuts. And we appreciate that the EU has maintained the 10% in its envelope. But overall, we estimate that the global aid cuts could push an additional 6 million children out of classrooms in the coming year, 30% of those in humanitarian settings. The first duty bearer is the country itself, the host government, but assistance globally can also help. So I think we need to continue to advocate for those resources. Let me finish quickly with the 4 asks. One is that we continue to put education at the heart of humanitarian responses. It is a life-saving, life-sustaining intervention that needs to be continued even in the midst of the humanitarian reset and the focus on the most vulnerable. Second, that we invest in gender-responsive solutions, looking at flexible multi-year gender transformative educational programs that address the specific needs of girls, including mental health protection and life skills. Third, that we work with local leadership, including local women's organization, teachers, and youth leaders. We really need to be grounded in local society. And then fourth, as I've already mentioned, that we continue to close the funding gap with domestic resources, but also that we fight for humanitarian funding to continue and humanitarian funding for education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Mr. Chavin. And thank you for all of the opening remarks and high-level remarks. Now we're going to transition to our civil society panel. We're very fortunate to have moderator Dr. Julianne Deitch, the Associate Director of Research for the Women's Refugee Commission. Julianne brings nearly 20 years of experience at the intersection of gender equality and global health, working in both humanitarian and development contexts with international, regional, and community-based organizations. Thank you, Julianne, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you so much to our esteemed high-level speakers. I think you painted quite a clear and stark picture of the challenges that girls are facing to access education in crisis-affected settings. I have the privilege of moderating our panel discussion with some leading experts and advocates working in some of the most pressing emergency contexts globally. I think through our panel discussion, we will dive a bit more into the nuances and the complexities of the challenges facing girls to access education. But I think more than that, and hopefully more importantly, we'll find that there are quite a number of innovative strategies that are being used to ensure that girls can access education, and in particular, that they can access education that is truly responsive to their unique needs and priorities. So before I introduce our panelists, a reminder that you all each have 4 or 5 minutes for your intervention. And because we have to be out of this room at 10:30, it's important that we keep to time. And Faith from ChildFund will be helping us to keep time. So thank you, Faith. And I will start by introducing our panelists. First, we have Mr. Chege Ngugi. Chege is ChildFund International's Africa Regional Director and a member of the organization's global leadership team. Based in Nairobi, Chege oversees operations in 9 countries across Africa, ensuring effective implementation of ChildFund's strategy to achieve its long-term vision. Before his appointment as Africa Regional Director, Chege served as ChildFund's Country Director in Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Kenya. So welcome, Chege. Seated next to me, we have Ms. Joan Kambambazi. Joan is a feminist activist who advocates for an end to child marriage and girls' right to education. She is also the founder and CEO of Gufasha Girls Foundation, a grassroots nonprofit organization in Uganda that champions the rights of adolescent girls and young women through advocacy, education support, and economic empowerment. And on my other side, we have Mr. Sultan Mahmoud Ibadi. Ibadi is Islamic Relief USA's International Program Coordinator for Asia. Ibadi brings 15 years of experience delivering development programs with leading international agencies, including RIP, USAID, the World Bank, and UNDP, as well as in the public sector. Previously, Ibadi served in leadership positions in USAID-funded economic growth, women's economic empowerment, and women's leadership development projects in Afghanistan. And he was also a permanent member of the National Qualification Framework Committee for Education in Afghanistan and served as an assistant professor at Khartoum University in Kabul. Welcome, Ibadi. We have Ms. Gaisu Yari. Gaisu is an advocacy and policy manager for Malala Fund. Gaisu is an experienced Afghan gender expert and storyteller. A former civil service commissioner in Afghanistan, she led the Afghan Voices of Hope project, which involved extensive story collection globally to engage with Afghan exiles and those still living in Afghanistan. As a former Wilson Center International Fellow, Gaisu focused on gender justice, a commitment that is reflected throughout her advocacy work and public speaking engagements to address critical women's rights issues in Afghanistan. Welcome, Gaisu. And last but not least, we have Dr. Helen Idiom. Helen is the Director of Program Quality and Influencing at Plan International Nigeria. She is a development and humanitarian practitioner with over 15 years of experience leading strategic initiatives to advance children's rights and gender equality. Before joining Plan International, Helen worked with several organizations, including FHI 360, ActionAid, and Achieving Health Nigeria initiative. In these roles, she contributed to impactful programming across the health, governance, and social development sectors. So a quick round of applause for our panelists. So my first question is going to be for Chege. And Chege, I think all of the high-level speakers noted that education is not only life-saving, but that it is also life-changing and life-sustaining. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about that. What does that mean in practice? And what are some examples from your work with ChildFund International?
Thank you for the question and for the opportunity. I think humanitarian crisis disproportionately affect most vulnerable populations, especially women and girls. These are people, again, when you look, there are a lot of inequalities, existing inequalities. So when humanitarian situation hits, that pushes them off the borderline. So I think for us as an organization, we know the importance of strengthening the access to education, especially in crisis. And I'll give examples of what we are doing. I think for us as members of the 11 organizations we work under ChildFund Alliance, we have adopted the triple nexus. This is the approach that takes into account development, peace building, and humanitarian together, because this is a trajectory that we all need to embrace. And what we are seeing in that is it helps us, one, ensure that children, especially girls, are part of the intergenerational dialogue, because that's a major issue again that we need to bring into this. I think the other thing that we are seeing is the aspect of how do we bring holistic education programs? For that is what I think we need to address both academic and social. And there's an aspect of also under that transitional education, which I think most organizations, it's a new area they're looking at. How do we embrace humanitarian into that? I think the other aspect we see that is very critical is training of teachers in what we refer to as child-centered and trauma-informed approaches. Because again, as we see, teachers play a very critical role in addressing humanitarian situations. Because what happens is you find children, most of them, like we see in Africa, where most children are left on their own. Parents go out looking for support and all that. And who is most left alone, looking at children is the teachers, are the teachers. How do you ensure that we are enabling teachers to engage with children under such a traumatic conditions? Some of the things we do is like creating safe spaces for children during such a situation. I think the other aspect that we engage in the supports this is supporting caregivers during this time to engage in positive parenting and educational advocacy. Because again, as we are saying, they are traumatized. How do we ensure that even under such, that they are able to provide support to their children, even when they are under such trying conditions? I think, as you mentioned, we see education in two roles: life-saving, and I'm giving an example of Sahel. Sahel, for those who know Sahel, is a stretch of about 10 countries, but our focus is in 4 countries. We're looking at what you call Central Sahel. We're looking at Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and to some extent Chad. But this is a region that has been affected by contracted conflict, very complex conflict for many years. That is complicated by climate change, migration, displacement, and all that. So what kind of program do we engage to in order to ensure that we are addressing these multifaceted challenges? And we see one, when you look at education as a life-saving intervention, and this is, we are looking for protection. How do we provide protection? We're also looking at safe spaces. How do you work with the communities to ensure that they are safe spaces, especially for girls? And the other aspect during such a times is health and nutrition. How do we support intervention that will bring health services and nutrition, especially considering many of them are out of school? How do you mobilize that? I think the other aspect we see is education as a life building intervention. And in this, we are looking at empowerment. How do we empower girls and their families to be able to overcome some of the harmful practices that are practiced, gender-based violence, early marriages, teenage marriages, and all that? How do we work with them and their families to do that, and caregivers? I think the other critical thing we are looking at is economic resilience, looking at building literacy and vocational training for girls to be able to participate in local economies and livelihoods activities. And I think the last one I mentioned is peace building and civic engagement. This is where we want to make sure that children, especially adolescent girls, are part of whatever is going on. They are contributing, they're not being left behind, that they're able to engage, they're able to contribute and all that. So
Thank you.
I think just one thing I would say, conclude. I think for us, as ChildFund Alliance, education is more than a right for girls in crisis settings. It is the key to returning to the place of peace and routine. And as an African saying is, in Africa, it is said, if you educate a boy, you educate a child. But if you educate a girl, you educate a nation. I'm not being discriminative, but that's a reality. I'm a boy, so I know that's the reality. So thank you.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Helen. Helen, when we talk about girls and educating a nation, that's quite a wide range of ages and different backgrounds and levels of education. We know that there are particular challenges and considerations for ensuring that girls stay in school through adolescence, so through age 10 up to age 19 or 18. Based on your experience in Nigeria, what are some of the most significant barriers that adolescent girls face to continue their education? And how has Plan International worked to address some of these challenges?
Thank you very much for that question. For us in Nigeria, while almost every region is experiencing some form of crisis, but the northern part of Nigeria has most amount of crisis due to insurgency and banditry that's been on for over 15 years. Now, I'll readily say that the biggest challenge that adolescent girls have faced is the issue around insecurity. There are so many other barriers, but then this is the underlying barrier. Take the attacks of insurgents, which leads to destruction of infrastructure in schools, poverty and economic constraints. Other barriers include cultural and social norms, negative cultural and social norms, and then even poor implementation of legal frameworks. Now with insurgents, when there's an attack in a school, the infrastructure is destroyed. Girls are abducted, parents sometimes out of fear would withdraw girls from schools and take them to some other schools. You now find out that most of the children will now go only to the safe schools, and that puts a lot of pressure on the infrastructure. For girls, adolescent girls, the wash facilities is even more important to them because of their normal menstrual flow. And so when this happens, two things will happen. Either the children will not go to school when they're supposed to go to school, or they will miss out on the days that they're on their period. Coming back, they don't catch up. Before you know, they're out of school. Or sometimes in northern Nigeria, there's stigma around menstruation. So girls do not also go to school around that period, they stay at home. Resources too, teachers are out of school because of insecurity. Some are killed, some are afraid, and they leave. Then the other aspect of insecurity, displacement and destruction of livelihood. So parents are either in IDP camps or they have lost their source of livelihood. What are they going to be thinking about at that point in time? It's not girls going to school. Whatever resources they have, they will prioritize feeding, accommodation, shelter. And if anybody's going to go to school, it's the boy child, because here too, sociocultural norms detects that girls don't go to school, girls get married. So girls are still at the receiving end of this disproportionate issues. Now, on top of all of this is the government part. Yes, there are laws, child rights laws, legal frameworks, UBE, Universal Basic Education laws, but the implementation is hardly there because of, well, we know government and sometimes what they do. For us in Plan, bearing in mind all of this, we had taken a global solution, the Accelerated Education Program, and used it to craft a locally relevant solution to education. So we have the Accelerated Basic Education Program, which is a flexible program that compresses 9 years of basic education into 3 years, and girls are able to go to school. We didn't just sit down and take this decision by ourselves. We had brainstorming meetings with communities and designed these interventions in such a way that it is relevant to the communities, to the girls. So we had children sitting down with us and designing these interventions, especially as it aligns with their community. So we have an integrated structure around Accelerated Basic Education Program, which looks at providing wash facilities in schools. In some schools, we've had pad banks that we have opened where there are menstrual pads there, and girls know that when they go to school, they'll get a pad. Sometimes we give them dignity kits. This is just for the girls. We also have facilities in each of the schools where we've intervened. We've had gender segregated washrooms so that girls are comfortable in school. And on the community side, we've engaged with the community to dispel some of these negative norms. For parents, depending on the situation, we do some form of economic empowerment, even bringing them into VSLA, Village Savings and Loans Association, to help them generate income. We did not just stop with this, we also ensure that we undertake advocacy to government. So far, we've had some very interesting results, and I hope I'll get to speak about that later. Thank you.
Want to turn to Gaisu now. Gaisu, Mr. Chaiban noted that in his recent trip to Afghanistan, just how determined girls are to continue their education despite the immense barriers they're facing. So we're hoping that you could tell us a bit more about these barriers, but also the strategies that Malala Fund and their partners have employed to help girls to build their resilience and continue to learn in such a restrictive environment.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me and being here. Ted, you have the privilege to travel in Afghanistan. And me as an Afghan woman, I can't. Right? Let me start by saying that Afghanistan becomes a black hole for women and girls in the past 4 years. September 17th is the anniversary that the Taliban put ban on girls' secondary education. I'm not sure how many times you actually open your phone, going through reels, going through your Twitter tweets to see what's happening in Afghanistan. I think what we push is that Afghanistan and women and girls are forgotten. It has been forgotten for 4 years. And it's putting us, our position, very difficult to work with partners who are on the ground. Let me address a little bit, I hope I can do it in 4 minutes, and discuss what's actually happening on the ground and what we hear from our partners. We do have partners on the ground providing alternative educations, and we have hidden schools that are also targeted apparently. And listen, if we are going to have an apartheid system that is controlling women and girls in Afghanistan, cannot expect anything from them, right? We do see that is really systematic, the way that they target women and girls. They have a lot of decrees. Now that you said some countries are experiencing conflict, disasters, but for Afghanistan, girls are not allowed to go to school and learn. That's taken away from them. And listen, let's see what happens 10 years from now, having a generation of girls who have not been to school, right? And I think there is a lot of surveillance and closures to the partners that are working on the ground. We do have a lot of digital restrictions. I'm not sure if you heard about the news on girls, the Wi-Fi cut in more than 14 provinces around the country. We also have, I think some of our colleagues talked about the psychological tools on girls in Afghanistan, and what does that really mean? Because they are really compacted in their own houses and they don't have access to any community based services or anything. They cannot even, travel. They cannot have access to any physical services that are available for them. So how do we do it? I think the way we look at the ban, and it's still systematic, we call it gender apartheid in Afghanistan, and that's how we advocate for girls' education in Afghanistan. We do provide home and community-based learnings that are not very, we don't talk about it because it's really risky, and we try to mitigate a lot of risks that are existing in Afghanistan for girls. And we do alternative and digital pathways on the ground, and our partners are very brave to actually implement those programs inside the country and from distance. I think safeguarding and risk management is a priority for us at Malala Fund to make sure that we don't put any girls in the Taliban's prison, right? And closure of the centers that we have on the ground. I think the other thing that we push hard, and Malala Fund, and it's our strategy, that we make sure that Afghan women lead organizations are leading the work on girls' education in Afghanistan because they can navigate their ways, how to provide those services on the ground. Finally, I think we're advocating for international accountability against the Taliban, who are creating a space that girls are not allowed to discuss of the same.
Thank you. And then, Badi, you have extensive experience as well, working on this issue in Afghanistan. And perhaps you could share then, based on this experience as well as other countries in South Asia, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, what are some other strategies that have proven effective for ensuring that girls can stay in school?
Good morning, everyone. Well, this is such a privilege to be part of this discussion. This is such an important topic. And I see a lot of commonalities, when it comes to like the girls' education post-crisis setting. And Afghanistan is, of course, on the top of the list with some exceptions, Well, I mean, I would just like to speak a little bit about Islamic relief and then reflect on my personal experience as well in the field. Someone who has studied in Afghanistan as well as like had an opportunity to work in this sector. So it's kind of a mix of like what my personal observation as well as projects that I've worked in the past. Islamic Relief is very active in funding women in girls' education in too many countries, besides so many other sectors, including in South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, of course, there. And I think there is, when it comes to like selecting the strategy, I think the first thing is that we need to make sure that it's a localized strategy, because this is such a sensitive topic, when it comes, because you're not trying to educate girls like in the cities. You speak about the rural side of the suburbs, where there is a negative perception which has already been established for centuries, not just the last 4 years. And all of a sudden, you're trying to bring something which is, already very popular and famous in the cities, and trying to convince people, to send their girls to schools. I think that's a very tough decision. But we would like to just reflect on some of the successful strategies and approaches that has relatively proven to be successful. So the first thing is, establishing the community education centers. Now, this community education center can serve as an entry gate for too many other projects to come. You can take it as a entry gate, to bring so many other projects that can complement the existing education-related projects. So the first thing that the community education center really helps us, it builds the trust in the communities, because you're engaging people right from the very first phase. You're not trying to take something which is already designed, but right from the beginning, you try to negotiate, participate, talk to people who has the power to make decisions, including the woman. I think that's one of kind of a strategy that has been successful in the past, not just in Afghanistan, but as I said, like in South Asia, where there's a lot of commonalities. And it also helps to reduce and minimize the negative perception about education, because they will always come up with examples of like A, B, and will say like in generalized example that education has this kind of a long-term impact, But there are some positive things about this community education centers as well. The last 20 years, at least in Afghanistan, I think the biggest positive change, if you can see, is like, if you can quantify it, is the Human Development Index. A lot of girls used to go to school in the past, and it would be wrong to say that that all parents do not want to send their girls to school, even in the far villages. The positive change, the perception has been changed, through media exposures. And as I said, like the sphere of trust, which is established through all these projects together. But since this is such a big topic, education, it is not just like sending someone to school, but you also have to make sure that they retain and they complete their studies. Sending school, I think that is just the first thing, enrolling them. But how do you ensure that this is going to long last? They complete their studies. And what is the numbers like? We always speak about the enrollment numbers, but what about the graduation numbers? When it comes to like the girls' education, I don't see a lot of statistics on these things. And also like in the post-crisis setting, especially in a country like Afghanistan, poverty is also another kind of a biggest kind of obstacle, that stops people sending them to schools because they want them to work on the streets, they are the bread earners of the families. So if you're trying to design kind of a woman-centered projects, try to complement it with some other kind of companies as well. In general, in short, because I know the time limitation, I would just say like, there are two key things, when it comes to like education in these post-crisis settings. The first issue is the issues that we can deal with. That is something that you can design a nice project, follow all those beautiful approaches, try to ensure participation, and as the panel members say, try to build the capacity of the teacher. But I'd like to also add, not just build it, but also provide incentives. Because how would you motivate a teacher to travel from the city, go and teach in such far villages, try to incentivize as well. So that's one kind of the issue, which is easily manageable, But the second part of the problem is, it needs more partnership. And when it comes to funding public projects, I think partnership is very complicated, How would you convince the partners to come and take part in such project where they don't see a lot of kind of a return on investment, something, a tangible kind of an outcome? But there are, again, some successful examples. The example of the microfinance, the woman-led enterprises, if a woman is working, they also try to become kind of a decision maker in the family as well, because you're actively, feeding your family. And then she can make a decision to send the kids to school as well. So it's kind of a blended, bigger kind of a package is required in order to make sure your strategies is working. The last thing is that try to localize the curriculum. When I was working as part of the national qualification framework, even in the bigger cities, there was oppositions. Because the people would say like, I see this subject in the past, but you're adding something that we haven't heard about it, So you have to be very slow with a slow kind of a pace, even sometimes with a snail's pace, it delivers kind of a very fruitful impact, when it comes to these kind of sensitive topics. So just the very last is, a lot of commonalities, a lot of things the speakers said, independent members, I see the same thing in my country, and I was just visualizing the Afghanistan, but of course, the good thing is, there is a positive attitude towards education. And I think that's kind of the enabling environment, in future, to take your projects and just go deliver the expected outcomes.
So, Joan, so many of our panelists mentioned the importance of engaging girls and communities in their efforts to design these innovative approaches to education. So based on your experience as a young feminist leader, what do you see as the most pressing barriers for girls in crisis-affected settings? And what role do young feminist leaders, such as yourself, have in addressing this issue?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's a very big privilege. I would say I know most of the panelists have talked about what I'm going to talk about, but I'll bring it out from where I come from. The biggest barrier is poverty. And poverty influences a lot of things, especially in countries like mine, but also all over the global south. And you realize that during crisis, when livelihoods are lost, it's always girls who are pulled out first from school. And they're pulled out from school to take care of their siblings, they're pulled out of school to contribute to the survival of the family. So that's one of the biggest barriers that I have really seen firsthand. And another barrier is the education systems and policies. Honestly, our education systems and policies have not been designed for underprivileged girls. They have not been designed really well to protect girls and empower them, and also especially during crisis settings. And realize that this makes, it really puts girls at a very, very big risk, because that same education systems that are supposed to protect them, not just to stay in school, but empower them. Because when we talk about education, this is not just about having girls or children in the classroom, it goes beyond that. So the education systems themselves also is one of the barriers. And also another barrier that I'd really talk about is child marriage. Child marriage is one of the biggest barrier when it comes to girls accessing, not just even accessing, but also completing education. I'll share about my story as to why I do what I do and why I'm really so much passionate about ending child marriage. It's a story from a very personal experience. I'm sorry if I get vulnerable here, but I had a best friend, and my community that I come from, our families are agriculture families until today, and we depend on agriculture for livelihood, for food, for everything. And here came a time in 2012 where we had a very, very bad drought. And it really, really made our crops, I say our because I know I was a little girl, but my dad earned a lot from that to send us to school, to give us a life. And here came a time when this happened and we had nothing. And I think I should say that I was very, very privileged that no matter all that happened, my dad continued and, pushed so much to see that I continued to go to school. But my friend's family, they had nothing. They were totally left with nothing. And here came, child marriage is just a tradition, it's a belief, it's a social norm. And her family believed that it was okay not for her to go back to school. And they believed that she had gone far with school. And here came this rich man, old man, 62-year, who gave in 2 cows as bride price next to each for her. So she was pushed to marriage because the family didn't have any other option for her. So you realize that child marriage is one of the barriers that really limit girls from not just accessing but completing education as well. So there's so many. If I started to talk about the barriers that I've seen firsthand at grassroots, because I work directly with girls and communities, there are really quite many. And you realize that even there's so many specific needs of girls. Let me take an example, the menstrual needs, the psychosocial support the girls need. There's so much often overlooked. And realize that all these, and also safety, girls walk these long distances, they face harassment, they are being violated, and realize that all these put them at a risk. And you just see them not continuing with school or just even giving up with school. And I think I'll just say, I'll just talk about those barriers because there are really, really quite many, especially when it comes to communities, like where I come from. And for the second part of the question where you said what a young feminist,
What role would a young feminist?
I think I should say the role we have is advocacy and action. But what I should really say is that we are doing the work already. And we are not just speaking out, we are not just calling out governments, humanitarian agencies, donors to put girls at the center of crisis response. We are at the grassroots. We are working with girls. We are working direct with the communities. We are working with the schools. We are creating livelihood programs for girls and their families. we are training teachers. We have a program that trains teachers with the schools that we work with. We are doing so much work to see that girls are not just accessing education, but they are really completing their education. And I know I am not the only feminist leader doing that. There's so many other amazing young feminist leaders doing that, but specifically for the work we do at Fashion Girls Foundation is we ensure that we do not just keep the girl in the classroom, but they are empowered, they are protected. We are creating these safe spaces to teach them about leadership, about their rights, and also about the other economic empowerment aspects that they really need to thrive even during this crisis context. Yeah, that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone. I think because of our incredible timekeeping abilities, we might have time, looking at Ashley, for one or two questions from the audience. So are there any questions for any of our panelists? And I'm sorry, it's just who I saw first. You and.
Thank you. My name is Hashim Pashtun. We lead a project providing online education to Afghan girls. And my questions to all the panelists is that two of the major upcoming possible opportunities that I want to ask, what are your thoughts? One is we see there's lots of shared problem that we have, but a common platform, a one-stop shop of shared resources that we have across the globe for the problems of education. I mean, there are lots of resources around, but we still see islands who are not well connected or coordinated. And we see because the problem is common, how can we find a common solution as much as possible that we don't have to start from scratch again, but we can kind of replicate. And second is the use of AI. How much we can use AI to help support the women education, especially in, and I know that you mentioned about internet issues, and I understand, but we do see AI coming and it's really helping us. We provide online education to more than 12,000 Afghan girls. We have translated more than 4,000 courses in Pashto and Dari from English via AI. So just want to share this thought and what are your thoughts or if you have strategies for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll take the second question so that we can.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Meg and the entire team. My name is Lady Mariam Jam. I'm the founder of I Am the Code. So I've been working in refugee camps over the last 10 years to teach young women and girls how to code. So my question is, are you working in refugee camps in Kakuma, in Dadaab, in getting young women and girls to have skills, technological skills? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the questions are both having to do with technology and emergent technology. So one being how can AI and other technologies be used to support education initiatives in crisis affected settings, and then similarly our young girls and young women, are there any skills building initiatives that you have experience with in refugee settings for girls? I don't know who wants to take, if anyone has experience with AI, integrating AI platforms, hot topic. Yeah.
So for us, AI is still quite new, but then digital skills are things that we have in Plan Nigeria incorporated into the things that we do. We have the Thrive program, whereby we link young persons that have come out of school to workspaces. And in that place, we do a lot of training for them on digital skills. One of the things that for the Accelerated Basic Education program I talked about, is that it's flexible and pupils are either streamed into formal school at the end of the period, or they're given skills, basic skills for them to make a living if they're unable to go on to formal school. And some of these things are the things that we're driving, giving these young girls digital skills, because the truth is that without those skills, in the nearest future, they'll become obsolete. I'm glad to say that yes, it's a drop in the ocean because we have like 18 million out of school children, but in the last 6 years, through Plan, we've been able to invest and impacted 600,000 children, with 35% of these mainstreamed into formal school, and the other ones have basic education skills that they're using. The issue of working in silos, yes, is true. And one of the things we've done in Nigeria is that we have driven it from the policy aspect. Over the years, we were the ones that first started accelerated basic education program in Nigeria. But we understand that it's not sustainable for us alone. So through advocacy with the federal government, with the Ministry of Education, just this year, they've accepted the ABEP to be the curriculum that's going to be used by every partner operating in Nigeria for out of school children. So that's one way we are trying to ensure that we are connected and making the most impact across Nigeria. Thank you.
I think AI is an interesting technology, and it can address most of the challenges that you're facing, even in conflict-infected countries. But one thing that I think we need to address is the digital inequity and the infrastructure, because without that, then it becomes a challenge. And I see that's where I see as the civil society organizations, government, and corporates trying to work together and invest, create that infrastructure. Then be able, the education aspect of it, that we break the gap between the digital inequity. That way then we can see our youth and others being able to take advantage of AI. I think the other thing that we need to look at, even with AI and all, and I think Sultan mentioned that, referred to that, is the aspect of there's a lot of rich traditional knowledge that we need to tap, even for girls, how to, because we have had crisis. Although that the magnitudes have now gone higher and they're protracted, but what are some of these traditional knowledge that our communities bring that we need to tap as we now bring in AI and other aspects? Yes, ChildFund International has been supporting the refugee programs, especially in Uganda and now new in Ethiopia. We are looking at, especially in Uganda, we are looking at ECD, working with the refugee communities, providing early child development in those areas, but also looking at livelihoods for youth, the young adults, girls and boys, of what they are doing. They've seen that being able to transform them such that, and I think Uganda has one of the most flexible regulation on refugees, that they can work off camp and things up and all that, which has enabled them, some of them, to earn their livelihoods. It's different in Ethiopia, just new getting to that, but you're also going to looking at early child development and youth livelihoods. I think that's a potential again that we can be able to enter and make a change that can now be able to impact the community at large. Yeah, thank you.
And does anyone else have any reflections? I mean, he noted the use of AI in Afghanistan specifically, so any thoughts or reflections on?
I think I quickly would say that, but in Malala, you're trying to explore different ways to use, digital internet. And I think the capacity and the interest exists among young women because they're really interested to be connected to the world and learn, use their homes as a space where they could learn. But I think the infrastructure is important, right? And I think accessibility becomes very hard because now, if you're looking at the internet, computer skills trainings, accessibility to the provinces are becoming very difficult because I think Kabul still has Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is usually a stronger method of internet to be connected. But the phone is still 3G or 2G in provinces and districts. It becomes very difficult if you don't have the infrastructure thinking innovatively. I don't think every time we talk about Afghanistan, and I think there are points you said, and I disagree because we still think that we are in that 20 years, right? That we have invested on girls' education in Afghanistan. It's a different time. I think it's a different reality in the country. And then it doesn't matter how creative can you be, you still have a huge challenge because of the internet shutdown.
All right, thank you so much again to all of you. And if I may, just before I pass it along for closing remarks, just to highlight a few things that I thought were really commonalities and really critical for us to walk away with. I think we see that in an increasing number of crisis-affected settings with so many complexities and overlapping phenomenon that are creating just more protracted and complex situations, that formal systems that may have been there before to protect girls and to help them transition into adulthood are severely disrupted and may not exist at all. And that education can be a way to fill the gaps, and that education in crisis affected settings, so many of you said, is not just as we think of basic education, learning to read and write and learning to do basic arithmetic. It can really be a way to provide a holistic intervention, holistic services, as well as empowerment for girls, and really shift community norms. But in doing so, we have to think about alternative pathways that are outside of the formal education system. Unfortunately, when those formal systems don't exist or are severely weakened in crisis settings, we have to think of alternatives, such as you mentioned in Nigeria, this accelerated basic education, home-based learning in Afghanistan, and other initiatives that you mentioned that might be outside of the formal education system or integrated into that system, but can be alternatives and innovative ways to ensure that girls are able to access education and other services. And then the last thread was just the importance of these initiatives being women and youth-led, that they have to be really tailored to the context and the challenges and constraints, not just in general, but in that moment that girls are facing. And that so many of these situations are ever evolving, ever changing, and without that local leadership and ownership, they won't be as agile and able to adapt to the challenges that we see in so many of these settings. So thank you again so much. I think we see a lot of creativity and resilience in these approaches, and you can, after 10:30, when we vacate this room, you can meet the panelists, I think, outside in the lobby as well if you have other questions. So with that, I will introduce Ms. Lillian Nkunzimana. Ms. Nkunzimana is the UN representative of the Baha'i International Community here in New York. She has a background in gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. Most recently, she served as secretary of the NGO Committee on Social Development. She has also served as a community organizer, engaging youth and their families in educational programs. Lillian holds a master's degree from York University and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Toronto in African Studies and a minor in political science. So Lillian, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Julianne, and thank you so much to all the organizers for this really informative event and conversation. It's wonderful to be a part of the program, and it's very hard to actually try to sum up everything that has been said. So I won't do that. I'll just maybe pick out a few things that stuck out to me. And I was looking at the concept note, trying to look at the desired outcomes that were described there. And some of the things that, the goals for the program today was to try to identify what are some of the actionable steps that we can take. So one of the things that was mentioned, and I think this came up actually repeatedly across the conversation, was there's some norms that seem to repeat themselves across location. This idea that the value of girls is for them to reproduce and boys go to school because they're the primary economic actors in the society. So how do we identify ways to be able to change mindsets about this, that the education of both girls and boys is important regardless of the setting. There was also a desire to have an understanding of all the, not just the logistical barriers to education, but also the cultural norms. And I think some of the practical steps that were shared about, establishing trust. There's obviously the technicalities of using technology and AI, but it's also how do you ensure that we're not just coming into communities and introducing foreign ideas, but there's this level of trust that's created in communities. And there was, some ideas also was about putting a budgetary number on how much we invest in the education for girls. We have, I think there have been some really interesting research recently about how much we invest in, at a national level, in
protecting our borders and militarization, but then we don't seem to be able to find the same level of investment and money when it comes to investing in education, especially education of girls. So I think we're reaching to the choir when it comes to that. Maybe I'll just finish with a personal reflection on education. I was born in Rwanda and grew up in a conflict-affected country, and I grew up in Haiti, another conflict-affected country. And I'm so grateful to my parents for repeatedly valuing the education of 5 girls in the family and the sacrifices that they made. And I think the point that was made about how regardless of where girls are living in horrendous situations, I don't know if anybody has been to Haiti recently, it resembles a war zone. People continue to live their lives, and girls still have a hopeful vision of the kind of future that they want to have. That's not erased because they're living in conflict-affected situations. So how do we, all these numbers and statistics that were shared represent real people and their hopes and their aspirations. And having a place where one can have an education, it becomes like a haven. You know, I was so lucky to have a scholarship to go to a high school in Canada. And I just, in Haiti, you can't walk down the street and go for a coffee with your friends. Even just that was like invaluable. So how do we create these havens where girls, boys can go and still have, imagine what their future can be like? So I'm just really grateful to all of you for sharing all that you shared and the work that you're doing. And I hope that the GA is productive and that we can all continue to do this important work. Thank you.